A thin line of light cuts the kitchen floor as his phone vibrates against the pan. The flickering bulb above us pulses in an uneven rhythm, making the shadows on the counter tremble like they're hiding something they can't decide whether to reveal. The air feels too still for a weeknight, too measured, as if the room itself is holding a breath it doesn't want to release. He stands with his back to me, shoulders slightly hunched, stirring something that smells faintly like rosemary and resignation. The pan sizzles in soft bursts, little pockets of heat snapping open then closing again before they can become anything more. His movements have that familiar domestic ease, but there's a hesitation threaded through them, a tiny stutter in the cadence of how he shifts his weight from one foot to the other. The phone vibrates again, harder this time, rattling the metal lightly, creating a dull tremor that runs along the pan's handle and into the countertop like a quiet alarm no one is brave enough to acknowledge. I watch the vibration pattern, not the message, not the name, not the glow, just the rhythm. Precise, insistent, wrong. My fingers remain wrapped around the edge of the island, where the cold surface anchors me, though the flickering light keeps making it appear as though my hand is shimmering. I don't step closer, not because I'm afraid of what I'll see, but because I already understand something has shifted. Distance can tell the truth long before words do. He hums faintly to himself, like he's trying to stitch a sense of normalcy into the silence, but the tune keeps unraveling. Every time the bulb flickers, a thin slice of light cuts across his arms, illuminating the tension in the tendons near his wrists. The phone vibrates a third time, shorter a tap, instead of a tremor, as if whoever is on the other side is growing impatient. The sound is subtle, barely audible, but in a room that feels ready to crack, even a whisper becomes a warning. The scent of garlic rises warm and sharp, battling with a faint, colder undertone, something metallic the flickering shadows seem to carry. I let the moment stretch. In media res isn't a narrative choice. It's where I'm standing, not the beginning, not the end, just the split center where truth and fear collide under bad lighting. He shifts again, checking the pot using the wooden spoon, not to taste, but to stall. The bulb sputters overhead, dimming for a breath before flaring back, and the brief dark makes the vibration sound louder, as if the phone is trying to speak into the void. My heartbeat stays steady, not calm, not detached, just steady, because steadiness is how you survive when a room starts telling you the truth. He finally reaches for the phone, but not with the urgency of someone eager to connect. It's more like he's trying not to appear too eager, his fingers pausing mid-air, as if he's editing his own hesitation. The screen lights his hand, a pale reflection flickering across his knuckles. A shadow splits across his arm, jagged like the truth is already trying to carve its way into the room. He doesn't turn around. He doesn't acknowledge me. He doesn't need to. Domestic silence is its own confession. The flickering bulb makes the stainless steel surfaces shimmer, pan fridge handle, the edge of the knife block, each one returning a skewed version of reality, as if the kitchen is offering possibilities I haven't yet named. My breath moves carefully in my chest, as I watch him hold the phone a second too long thumb, hovering over the screen. He swallows once sharp, and the motion ripples down his neck, like something caught in transit. I could speak. I could cut the silence with something small, something neutral. A question about the food the day the recipe he picked. But speaking feels like stepping into a reflection I'm not ready to disturb. So I wait. I wait as the light flickers again, and the phone in his hand pulses once more. I wait as he sets it down too gently, face down, as though turning it over erases the truth beneath the surface. I wait, because this moment matters, the moment before the fracture, the moment where stillness is louder than confrontation. His spoon taps the side of the pot, a small metallic click that sounds like punctuation on a sentence he hasn't spoken. He inhales through his nose, as if gathering composure for nothing in particular, but the breath trembles. The garlic scent shifts again, warmer now, but the metallic undertone clings to the air as though it refuses to be washed out. My eyes trace the line of light on the floor, that thin blade of brightness slicing across tile and into shadow. It reminds me of something narrow, precise, dangerous, not violent, but inevitable. He is still not turning around. That is the detail that presses hardest against my ribs. Not the phone, not the vibration, not the light. The choice not to face me. Because people who are innocent face the room. People who aren't study the floor, or the pan, or the shadows instead. Silence can be louder than any confession when the room already knows the truth. The bulb flickers again, slower this time, as if tired from holding its own tension. The vibration stops completely, but the quiet it leaves behind feels heavier than the sound ever did. He stirs the pot again, slower, deliberate, a performance of calm with frayed edges. I shift my weight slightly, the soft scrape of my shoe against the tile, making him pause for half a breath before he resumes stirring. The pause tells me more than a sentence would. The phone remains face down, its presence palpable, practically radiating meaning across the counter. The kitchen feels like a stage caught between scenes, waiting for the curtain to fall or rise. The light flares one more time, brighter than before, casting a harsh line across the countertop and splitting the room into two artificial halves, before and after. Past and present. Truth and the version he wants to keep. I inhale, not sharply, not dramatically, just enough to remind myself I am anchored here, not drifting. He still doesn't look at me, and in that refusal, he tells me everything he doesn't say aloud. Some truths begin in the silence before the first lie breaks open. The flickering stops at last, leaving the room washed in a steady, unforgiving glow. The pan hisses. The phone waits, and the light holds the moment like a blade suspended in air. I let the tension settle into my bones as the last beat of the scene sharpens around us, crisp and unblinking. The room feels ready for the fracture to begin, and I stand perfectly still in its narrowing light, letting the truth lean closer with every passing second. I'm Elise Granger, 38, a corporate auditor from Chicago, Illinois, and I used to think quiet houses were a kind of safety. Now I understand they can also be warning signs wearing the masks of ordinary nights. The memory settles in my mind with the cool weight of something I should have noticed earlier, something that was already shifting beneath the surface. It was a Thursday, cold enough that the wind kept brushing the windows with a persistent, restless tapping. I remember coming home with my hands full, laptop bag on one shoulder, take-home files pressing against my wrist coat, half unbuttoned from the rush between the train and the walk back. When I reached for the door, the cold doorknob startled me with how sharply the chill bit into my palm. It was the kind of cold that felt intentional, like the metal had been waiting to tell me something. Inside the apartment held the same familiar shape it always did, but the atmosphere felt different, thinned out, unsettled. The air carried a faint trace of tonight's dinner prepped hours earlier, layered under a scent of something warm that didn't belong to food. I walked across the hardwood, listening to the soft echo of my own footsteps, feeling the quiet wrap around me in a way that was almost too controlled. I dropped my keys on the counter, and as they landed, the light from the window caught the surface. A thin reflection trembled across the counter. I didn't think of it as a sign at the time, just a flicker of brightness moving where it didn't usually move. But the tremble stayed with me longer than it should have, like the light wanted to imprint itself into my memory. I stood there for a moment, soaking in the silence. It was the kind of silence I had once found comforting after a long day of work, when numbers, timelines, and discrepancies crowded my head. But that night, the quiet felt even too carefully placed, as if the room had been polished into stillness. Daniel wasn't home yet. He had texted earlier, running late. Big project. Don't wait up. There wasn't anything unusual about the message. But something in the phrasing had landed awkwardly, like a piece that didn't fit the puzzle it claimed to belong to. That was the first time I recognized the tone, gentle distance. A soft boundary being drawn without announcement. I walked through the kitchen slowly, noticing subtle details: the half-emptied coffee mug from the morning still on the table, the chair angled slightly differently than when I'd left, the smell of his cologne lingering faintly, as though he had rushed out quickly. None of it meant anything by itself, but I felt the shape of a pattern forming around the edges. I hung my coat, set down my files, and wandered to the sink. The reflection on the counter was still trembling, only now it felt like it came from somewhere inside the room rather than the window. The flicker resonated with that sense of something about to come undone. I didn't investigate. Not then. I just stood frozen in that quiet moment of noticing, without understanding. My job trained me to see micro inconsistencies, misalignments in data entries, subtle variances in time-stamped logs, financial patterns that slipped a beat. But I'd never applied that instinct to my marriage. I never wanted to. When the front door finally opened, Daniel stepped in with the same warm smile he always wore, but his eyes moved differently. Not unfriendly, just distracted. His coat was slightly damp near the shoulder, though he mentioned nothing about rain. He brushed a kiss across my cheek with a hurried breath that felt more habitual than sincere. "Long day?" I asked. "Brutal," he answered, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm starving. You eat yet?" There was nothing in his voice that indicated a lie, yet something felt hollow under the surface. He walked past me toward the bedroom, and I watched him go with a quiet awareness blooming inside my chest. Later, when he showered, his phone vibrated on the bathroom counter. A single buzz, then another, and then silence. I didn't move toward it, didn't touch it. I simply listened to the hum through the door, feeling that same coldness from the doorknob echo in the center of my chest. I told myself the messages were harmless work notifications, group chats, reminders. Anything, everything except what it actually might be. He came out of the bathroom, drying his hair. Phone quickly collected without a glance in my direction. I saw the flicker in his expression, the slight shift when he read whatever was on the screen. It vanished just as quickly, smoothed over with practiced ease. I took note of it but said nothing, because at that point, I wanted quiet more than truth. That night at dinner, he talked about deadlines and meetings, his words spilling in neat lines, while his eyes kept drifting toward the counter where his phone rested face down. He had never been the face-down type. He used to leave it unlocked, open to the world, as he played podcasts or checked recipes. But people change their habits when they want their screens to stop talking. I listened, nodding at all the right moments, but inside, a shift was forming. Not a full suspicion, not yet. More like a tension coiling at the edge of something I wasn't ready to see. When I finished my meal, I began washing dishes. As the water ran, I noticed that same trembling reflection again, sliding across the counter with the rhythm of the faucet. It shimmered for a moment, stretched thin, then dissolved. I watched it disappear in silence. Daniel leaned against the fridge, scrolling through his phone with the same intensity someone might use when reading a message twice to make sure they understood it. He didn't think I noticed, but it's impossible not to notice someone avoiding being noticed. The night ended uneventfully, or at least on the surface it did. He fell asleep quickly. I didn't. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the cold from the doorknob earlier still lodged in my palm, like a warning I hadn't interpreted correctly. The next morning he left early, saying the project needed him. He kissed me goodbye. I felt nothing in the gesture. Not absence, not connection. Just nothing. Before leaving for work myself, I picked up my keys from the counter. The light caught the surface again, trembling faintly in that same thin, wavering line. I didn't know then that it was the beginning of everything breaking. I only knew the reflection trembled a little too easily. And so did I. I had always believed kitchens were the most honest rooms in a home. Something about the way light hits stainless steel, the way heat reveals itself without shame, the way reflections refuse to lie. But that morning, honesty felt like a thin, wavering thing, always there, always visible, but never quite willing to settle long enough for me to identify it. Daniel had left earlier than usual. His footsteps rushed, his tie slightly crooked, the way it gets when he forgets to check his appearance before heading out. I watched the door close behind him, feeling a quiet pinch of something I couldn't name yet. Unease, or distance, or the faint outline of truth trying to breathe through a sealed room. The apartment was filled with soft winter light, pale but direct, and as I stepped into the kitchen, the beam struck the window at a slanted angle. It bounced off the countertop, refracting into a thin, shifting line that bent itself across the glass backsplash. The glass reflection moved like a fractured pulse, narrow, trembling, almost alive. I paused, watching it ripple across the surface whenever I shifted even a fraction of an inch. It felt like a message, though. At the time, I didn't know what it was trying to tell me. I walked toward the counter, set my coffee mug down, and stared at the reflection again. Every movement I made distorted it, stretching, bending, splintering. There was a strange comfort in seeing something respond truthfully to me, even if the truth was only the physics of light. My phone buzzed once, a calendar reminder, then silence again. I picked it up, checked the notification, and was about to set it down when my eye drifted to the edge of the kitchen island, the place where Daniel had rested his phone while cooking the night before. The memory of the vibration pattern, the silent warning, the stiffness in his shoulders, as he avoided turning around, all of it returned in a quiet wave that made my stomach tighten. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. I took a sip of coffee, walked around the island, and sat on the stool where he usually kept his laptop open in the evenings. The surface still held faint marks from last night, an imprint of a glass, a bit of rosemary from the cutting board, and a narrow smudge where his phone had been dragged away too quickly. That smudge is what made me do it. I didn't intend to become the kind of person who checks another's device. But the truth is that intentions matter far less than context. People behave differently when a room presents a question they can't ignore. I wasn't searching for anything in particular. I just wanted to understand that shift in his tone, the new distance in his eyes, the sudden habit of turning his phone face down. So when I walked past him last night and the screen lit up by accident, and he didn't notice, I saw just enough to know something was wrong. Not a message, not a name, just a time. A timestamp that didn't match his explanation for why he came home late. That discrepancy echoed in my head now, steady and quiet. A pulse under the skin of the morning. I opened my laptop and began working, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that brief moment. Not to the content of the message, because I hadn't seen the words, but to the fleeting number burned into my memory. 2018. The timestamp. I had told myself it was coincidence. Coincidences don't usually repeat. I muttered under my breath, setting down my mug. The glass reflection on the backsplash trembled again, as I moved as though agreeing. I hesitated before unlocking my laptop fully. The keys felt colder than usual beneath my fingers. I pulled up a few files that needed reviewing, but the numbers blurred almost immediately. My mind wasn't on work. It was on timelines, inconsistencies, small discrepancies that accumulate until the pattern becomes undeniable. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly, as I listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of someone upstairs walking across their floor, the soft buzz of city traffic muted through winter air. Everything blended into a quiet rhythm. And then my phone chimed again. This time it wasn't a reminder. It was an alert I'd set long ago during a complicated audit case, an alert that signaled suspicious behavior in time-based logs. I had forgotten it still existed on my device. It triggered because of a screenshot I had accidentally saved last night. Not by intention, not by snooping, simply by reflex. When I walked by him, saw the screen glow, and he turned it off. Abruptly, my thumb brushed my own phone screen in my hand in a way that captured the image without me meaning to. I opened my gallery. There it was. The faint, grainy screenshot of his phone notification. Refer ZL47 timestamp 2018 device ID 6124A. Evidence number one. The image wasn't clear enough to read the message content, just enough to register an anomaly. But anomalies matter. They always do. Especially when the person you trust begins behaving like a carefully edited version of themselves. I stared at the screenshot, studying the numerical pattern. 2018. A message at a time he said he was wrapping up at the office. But his office lights shut off at 1950 on weeknights motion sensors I had seen myself during a holiday party. It wasn't suspicious then. Now it was a puzzle piece. The device ID didn't match his work phone either. He rarely used his personal one for office communication. Another inconsistency. I zoomed in, observing the faint glow, the blurred lines of the notification banner, the way his phone's brightness setting had been unusually high. Why would he adjust it upward unless he'd been reading something important or something he didn't want to miss? I exhaled slowly. Not panic, just recalibration. When you work with financial reports, the smallest discrepancy is never small. It's a clue to the central flaw, a hairline crack in a facade. I set my phone down, ran a hand across my face, and looked at the glass reflection again. The trembling line now stretched along the backsplash in a shape that resembled two overlapping slashes. It felt symbolic in a way I hated to acknowledge, like a warning about lines being crossed. I got up from the stool, pacing the room slowly. My footsteps made the reflection shift again, flickering over the glass like it was trying to escape. I picked up my mug, finished the last sip of coffee, and set it beside the sink. The sound echoed in a way that made the room feel emptier. For a moment, I told myself I was overthinking, that marriage required trust, not timelines and screenshots and analysis, that people get tired, make mistakes, forget details, and nothing is always as perfect or precise as numbers. But then I remembered Daniel's expression last night, the quick, guilty flicker in his eyes when he grabbed his phone, the tension pulling at his jaw, the way he'd stirred the pot without tasting the food, and the way he didn't look at me. Not once. I went to the window, touched the cold glass, and watched the reflection tremble again as my breath fogged the surface. Something inside me shifted then, not suspicion exactly, but acknowledgement. Patterns don't lie. People do. And the reflection on the glass knew it long before I did. By Saturday afternoon, the sky had settled into a dull gray that made everything look sharper than it needed to be. I stepped outside to get some air, partly to clear my mind, partly to escape the weight of the apartment walls pressing too close. The winter air carried a metallic bite, the kind that lingers along your skin and makes each breath feel sharpened. I zipped my coat and started down the walkway behind our building, the one that curved past the communal garden and the metal railing that always reflected the sun a little too intensely. The clouds shifted just enough to let a thin beam of light slip through, striking the railing beside me. The beam stretched distorted into a long, wavering silhouette. A metallic shadow spilled over the concrete like something spilled from a separate, darker world. It flickered each time the clouds moved, broken and reformed over and over again. I slowed down, watching it ripple. Noir scenes aren't made of dramatic thunder or gunmetal skies. They're made from these quiet distortions, reflections that whisper before the truth arrives. That was when I saw Daniel standing near the parking lot. He was angled partly away from me, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding his phone near his chest, as if it were a secret he was shielding from the wind. The way he stood looked staged, a posture too still, too deliberate, as if he were caught mid-thought and didn't want anyone to notice. I kept walking, not hiding the sound of my steps. His head lifted slightly, but he didn't turn fully. That was the first sign. The second was the glow of his phone lighting his face in a quick flash, too fast for him to have typed anything too bright, to have been accidental. His thumb hovered in midair for a beat too long before he lowered the screen. I stopped a few steps away from him. "Didn't expect to see you out here," I said. He startled slightly, the way people do when they think they're alone with something they shouldn't be. "I was just getting some air," he replied, slipping his phone into his pocket too quickly. "Didn't see you." His voice was warm, practiced, familiar, wrong. Before I could answer, Camille, the neighbor who lived 2 doors down, rounded the corner carrying a grocery bag and adjusting her scarf. Her eyes flicked between us with a softness that suggested she sensed something, but wasn't sure of the shape of it yet. "Hey, Elise." "Hey, Daniel," she said with polite brightness. "Cold out today." Daniel forced a thin smile. "Yeah, just stepping out for a second." Her gaze lingered on him longer than usual. Observers always notice tension before the people inside it do. Or maybe Camille had noticed it already. Maybe I had been the one unwilling to see it. The wind pushed a strand of hair across my face, and as I brushed it back, Daniel's phone buzzed from inside his coat. The sound was muted but unmistakable. His shoulders tightened. He didn't reach for it. That was the third sign. I didn't move closer, not physically. But inside, something stepped forward. "Who's messaging you?" I asked, deliberately neutral. His face shifted just a small thing, a micro falter in the muscles around his mouth. "Work stuff," he said. "You know how they are." But he didn't take out the phone to check, which he always did. He looked over my shoulder instead toward the railing, where the metallic shadow stretched across the pavement, bending with the wind like a warning written in light. Camille adjusted the bag in her arms, clearly trying to give us privacy without being obvious. But she didn't leave. Some part of her must have sensed she shouldn't. "Can I see?" I asked quietly. He blinked. "See what your phone?" The pause that followed wasn't long, but it was long enough to cut cleanly through the thin veil he'd been wearing. "Elise." "Come on," he said. "You're being ridiculous." The word ridiculous hung in the air between us, like something delicate but destructive. I held out my hand steady and level. "Then show me." He didn't. Camille shifted her weight, a subtle motion, but one that deepened the tension in the air. She looked toward Daniel's pocket, then back at me. He exhaled, frustrated. "Not everything is an audit, Elise." A sentence meant to wound. It hit its target, but it also revealed more than he intended. And then, like fate had been waiting for the moment to split open. His phone buzzed again, this time so sharply that it jolted his coat. His hand shot down to silence it, but not fast enough, because the movement lifted the edge of his coat just enough for me to see the corner of the screen light up. I didn't see the message content, but I saw the preview bar, and I saw the small string of characters beneath it. MSG ID 229B, time 14:32. And that time was wrong. "What's that?" I asked quietly. He swallowed. "Work," he repeated. The metallic shadow on the pavement shifted as the clouds moved again, splitting his silhouette in two jagged shapes, a visual fracture that mirrored the internal one. I stepped closer, my voice low. "Your office log said you left at 1:30 today." He flinched. Camille's eyes widened just slightly, her breath catching in the cold. Daniel's reply came too quickly. "I forgot something there. Went back." I held his gaze and forgot to mention it. "You're reading into things," he said, softer but sharper. My heartbeat didn't spike. It rarely does. It just settled into a colder rhythm, like it was preparing to sift through a new layer of truth. "Then show me the message," I said again. His jaw flexed. "No." And there it was. The first, open admission. Not the words, those weren't spoken yet. But the refusal, the tension, the mismatch. Evidence number 2 had arrived. Not the content of the thread, not the sender's name, but the unmistakable fields I'd seen. Ms. G ID 229B, time 14:32. A mismatch with his timeline. A contradiction that didn't need context to be damning. Camille finally spoke, voice careful. "Everything okay?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Please, can we talk inside, Elise? No, I said, not raising my voice. We'll talk right here. The wind picked up scattering dry leaves across the pavement. They fluttered over the metallic shadow, breaking it into fragments. Daniel shifted his weight like he might bolt for the door, but he didn't move. You're misunderstanding, he said, but even he sounded unconvinced. Then help me understand. He didn't. Instead, he placed a hand on his pocket to steady the phone's vibration, a gesture that confirmed every crack already forming. Camille took a small step back, but kept her eyes fixed on us. Public pressure. Witness tension. The first unforgiving light. Daniel finally exhaled long and uneven. It's complicated. A single phrase that can mean 100 things, but all of them mean trouble. I looked at him, really looked, and felt the truth leaning heavily against the moment the same way the metallic shadow leaned across the pavement. Then start explaining, I said. He didn't, and the silence that followed was the first undeniable admission that something was wrong. Deeply, structurally, unavoidably wrong. The hours after the confrontation outside felt like walking through a dim hall where every door was closed, but every shadow was listening. We barely spoke on the way back into the apartment. The air inside was warmer than the cold outside, but warmth has never guaranteed honesty. It can be a disguise, a soft layer laid over a sharper truth. He went straight to the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, taking off my coat slowly, like peeling myself free from something tight. My fingers brushed against the pocket where my keys were, and when I pulled them out, the metal felt unnervingly cold for having been inside my coat. One key in particular, the one to our front door, began trembling slightly between my fingers. Not from the wind, from my grip, from the pressure of holding something that symbolized entry into a place I wasn't sure I fully belonged in anymore. The trembling key rested in my palm like a tiny, vibrating truth I didn't want to name. I closed my hand around it, forcing my breathing steady. The confrontation with Daniel was still echoing in the back of my mind, replaying in fragments the metallic shadow on the pavement, Camille's widened eyes, the split-second flash of his phone screen, revealing MSCI ID 229B, and a timestamp that should not have existed. I tried to tell myself there were explanations. There are always explanations if you want them badly enough. I set the keys on the counter. They rattled against the surface with a sharper clink than usual. The sound cut through the stillness of the apartment, and I stood there for a moment, hands still hovering as if waiting for something else to fall. Daniel emerged from the hallway, his hair still slightly damp from a rushed shower, his usual method of washing away evidence of stress. He leaned against the door frame, arms folded. "Elise," he said softly, "can we talk?" I didn't look at him immediately. Instead, I ran my finger along the edge of a small stack of mail I hadn't sorted yet. The envelopes were thin, unimportant utility bill reminders, promotional cards. But the action grounded me. "Talk," I said. He took a slow breath. "It's not what you think." That sentence again. Always the same shape, always the same purpose. To redirect, to soften, to obscure. "And what do I think?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "That I'm lying to you." I faced him then. "Are you—" He faltered. That hesitation, not a pause, not a breath, but a falter, was something new. Small but telling. It was enough to confirm the unease simmering inside me. "I should have told you I went back to the office," he said, clearing his throat as if rehearsing the line. "I forgot something there." "So you said." "It's true." "Then show me the message," I said gently. His jaw tightened. "I told you it's work. And work is a secret now." He didn't answer. Silence filled the room like a thin fog, dull but suffocating. I turned away from him, not to dismiss him, but because a flicker of something on the kitchen table caught my attention. A small white slip of paper sticking out from beneath yesterday's mail, a corner I hadn't noticed before. I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the paper, a cold awareness washed through me. I pulled it fully into view. Receipt number 8421K. Timestamp 1607. Location Rosewood Cafe. A cafe he and I had not visited together in almost a year. I stared at it, unable to ignore the way the timestamp hummed against the back of my mind like a warning tone. "Where were you yesterday at 4?" I asked without turning around. A long silence followed. "Too long." "Work," he said quietly. I closed my eyes. That wasn't even a good lie. "Your office closes at 5. You said you left at 5:30. He exhaled sharply. "I stopped by somewhere. I needed coffee. You told me you were too busy to take breaks." He didn't respond. I lifted the receipt slightly, letting it catch the kitchen's dim light. A faint reflection trembled across the glossy surface, just like the reflection that had trembled across the counter earlier in the week. Small signs accumulating. "This was in your pocket?" I asked. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. "It's a cafe," he said with a forced calm. "Why does it matter?" Because the timestamp contradicted his entire timeline. Because he had a meeting then. Because he had told me something entirely different. Because patterns don't lie. But instead of saying all that at once, I simply held up the receipt. "Who were you with?" He took a step toward me, hands slightly lifted in a placating gesture. "Elise, please, don't do this." "Do what?" My voice remained steady. "Ask questions." "Interrogate me," he said, the defense slipping into his tone like a reflex. "This isn't one of your audits. Then stop behaving like someone who's hiding an inconsistency." His mouth opened, then closed. His composure fractured for a second, just long enough for the truth to slip through the crack, the way light slips through fractured glass. "I just needed a break," he said finally. "You needed a break so badly you forgot you took it." He looked away. I turned the receipt over. The back was clean crisp. He hadn't even bothered to throw it away properly. Or maybe he thought I wouldn't look. Maybe he assumed I would keep trusting him without question. "We both needed a break," he said quietly, almost too softly. "It's been a hard few months. He wasn't wrong. But hardship isn't a license to twist timelines into knots." I set the receipt down beside the trembling keys. The keys were still vibrating slightly my imagination, or something deeper I didn't know, but the symbolism was too sharp to ignore entry access passage and the possibility of losing them. Daniel stepped closer. "I love you," he said. I looked at him, then really looked. His expression was soft, almost pleading, but the softness didn't align with his actions. People who love you look at you fully. They don't offer half answers and mismatched timelines and trembling excuses. "Then be honest," I said. He lowered his gaze. "I am being honest." Just like that, the moment closed. A quiet lock turning in the wrong direction. I picked up the trembling key again, feeling the cold metal steady under my grip this time. Something inside me steadied with it, not comfort, not calm, just clarity. I walked past him toward the bedroom. "Elise," he said behind me. His voice cracked slightly. "Please." I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because the truth had already started its own journey, and nothing I said could slow it down now. When I reached the bedroom door, I paused. The reflection on the dresser mirror trembled with the draft from the hallway. The receipt lay behind me on the counter like a tiny white flag of quiet betrayal. Something had broken, not loudly, but cleanly, and I could feel the fracture widening. For the rest of the weekend, Daniel and I shared the same rooms like strangers who had memorized each other's footsteps but forgotten each other's language. Words didn't pass between us unless absolutely necessary. And even then, they were thin, small, nearly weightless sound, without meaning. Sound meant only to fill the air, so the silence didn't break us in half. By Sunday evening, I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the timestamp on the receipt, the wrong time on his messages, the metallic shadow from the parking lot bending Daniel's silhouette into something unrecognizable. My thoughts kept circling the same questions. and each loop brought me closer to the edge of a conclusion I didn't want to reach. Around 10 that night, I went into the spare room, my unofficial office, ostensibly to look for my external hard drive. Really, I went because I needed space. The air in that room had always felt clearer, untouched by the residues of routine and marriage and slow-building distance. The faint scent of old books still lingered, and the lamp by the desk cast a soft circle of light that made the room feel smaller and safer. I opened the top drawer of my desk, or rather, I tried to. It didn't slide fully. It was caught on something inside, leaving it half open, angled just enough for a narrow band of light from the lamp to slip into the interior and illuminate a small sliver of what was inside. The half-open drawer looked strange in that moment, an object poised between concealment and revelation. The perfect noir geometry, a gap small enough to hide something wide enough to hint that it shouldn't be hidden. I pulled harder. It resisted. I tried again. Something inside shifted with a dull scrape, and the drawer slid open just enough for the reflection on the metal handle to flicker. I froze, because that flicker-thin sharp split across the handle exactly the way it had across the countertop days earlier. A distorted, trembling line of light bending across the edges, and in that flicker, something inside me tightened. The reflection splits as the truth stutters. The thought arrived uninvited, echoing itself into my chest. I leaned closer, squinting into the drawer. I expected to see tangled cords, pens, envelopes, anything innocuous. Instead, I saw my old USB recorder. I hadn't used it in years. It was something I'd relied on during a senior audit years ago, when documentation needed to be precise, and every verbal discrepancy mattered. I'd kept it out of habit, but I couldn't remember the last time it had been charged, let alone used. So why was it moved? Why had it been stuck behind the drawer, jamming it open? I reached in, picked up the recorder, and turned it over in my hand. The surface was dusty, except for one section along the side where a faint fingerprint smudge cut through the dust. Not my print. My fingers were too small to leave a mark in that exact position. The room felt colder suddenly, as though the walls were inhaling. I clicked the recorder on. A red light blinked once. There was a file. One I hadn't recorded. A single audio clip labeled Clip 03A. The number didn't match any naming convention I used. The naming structure sounded like something someone would title a quick test, a short capture, something done impulsively or in secret. For a second, I didn't breathe. Then I pressed play. Static crackled. A rush of ambient noise. Then a voice, Daniel's mid-sentence. Just need you to stop messaging me during a scrape. A shift. Then silence. Not natural silence. Not a lull in speech. A cut. An absence. I looked at the timestamp on the screen. An 11-second gap. Too long for an audio glitch. Too precise to be accidental. Too surgical to mean nothing. The air seemed to thicken around me as I replayed it, listening again and again, to the way the audio didn't fade or dissolve, it just vanished. The sound dropped out cleanly, sharply, like someone had taken scissors to the waveform. When the audio resumed, Daniel's voice came back softer, strained, the kind of voice people use when they think they're finally safe after lying. You don't understand if she finds out another scrape. A quiet thud. A breath. Then the recording ended. My hands didn't shake, but something inside my chest did. A pulse misfiring. A thought half-forming. A reality opening like the half-open drawer in front of me, slow, reluctant, exposing just enough to ruin the illusion. I stared at the recorder, trying to understand. Why was there only one clip? Why had the drawer jammed? Why? 11 seconds. Exactly. 11 cut out. If this had been a normal glitch, the silence would have been uneven. Staticky. But the file was too clean. Someone had edited it. Someone had also moved the recorder. And the only someone with access to this room besides me was My breath caught before the thought finished. Footsteps. Soft, approaching footsteps. Daniel. I closed the recorder quickly, placing it face down on the desk. The reflection on its metal clip split across its surface in two jagged light lines. The doorknob turned slightly. Elise. His voice was tentative. I swallowed, forcing calm. I'm here. The door opened halfway. He stood framed in the doorway, the hall light casting a fractured silhouette across his face. What are you doing? He asked quietly. Looking for something. His eyes flicked toward the desk, toward the drawer, toward the lamp reflecting off the recorder. Not directly just a flick, but flicks matter. A flick is a confession made in the smallest possible space. His voice lowered. You okay? I'm fine, I said. A practiced lie, a mirror of his own. Silence stretched. In that silence I remembered the audio gap again, the sharp cut that carried the exact length of a thought someone didn't want recorded. I remembered the way his voice had changed mid-sentence. The panic, the warning, the fear. If she finds out. The sentence coil tightened around my ribs. He stepped farther into the room, hands in his pockets, expression soft but strained. We should talk, he said. About what? He hesitated. About everything. Everything. A word so heavy it nearly tipped. I looked at him again, my husband standing under fractured light. His expression neither guilty nor innocent, but something in between. Something slippery, something tired. I nodded slowly. Okay. But inside, something was already shifting. Something cold. Something precise. Something aligned with patterns and timestamps and missing seconds. The truth was no longer hiding. It was stuttering, splitting, revealing itself through each quiet inconsistency. And I felt myself cross a threshold inside my own mind, leaving behind the woman who had simply wanted reassurance, stepping into the woman who now wanted the whole truth, no matter how much light had to be cut through to expose it. Because once you hear an edited silence, you can never unhear it. The next morning arrived without permission. I barely slept. My mind kept looping through the clipped audio, the missing 11 seconds, the way Daniel said everything like he was holding the rest of the sentence behind his teeth. When dawn filtered through the blinds, the light looked pale and bruised, as if it had been fighting something all night too. Daniel had already left by the time I stepped into the kitchen. His absence felt heavier than his presence had the night before. The silence had gained a new weight, thick but hollow, like it was trying to hide something behind its own stillness. I poured myself coffee, took one sip, and put the mug down. I couldn't swallow anything. My mind kept drifting toward the recorder upstairs, toward the 11-second gap, toward the tiny flick of panic in Daniel's voice before the cut. The reflection on the countertop trembled again when I set the mug too firmly down. I watched it split across the marble bending into two thin streaks that wavered as I moved. The reflection splits as the truth stutters. The echo pulsed through my chest again, a quiet reminder that the truth never arrives intact, it arrives in fractures. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. I froze for a moment, not in fear, but in the anticipation of something inevitable. I opened it and found Camille standing there, still in her scrubs, hair pulled into a tired bun. The exhaustion of a night shift, softened only by her underlying kindness. She held a small envelope in her hand. "Hey," she said gently. "Do you have a minute?" I nodded and stepped aside. She walked in, looking around the living room, as if the air itself felt different. Maybe it did. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. She started placing the envelope on the table. But I thought, maybe you should see this. My pulse tightened. See what? She hesitated, the weight of what she knew flickering in her expression. I don't want to get involved, but last night after everything outside, something didn't sit right with me. So when I came home this morning, I checked my porch camera. The air thinned, and I saw something you might want to know. My hand hovered over the envelope. When last night? 2102, 2102. The number struck with the cold precision of an audit timestamp. I opened the envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. The edge was rough from being torn too quickly. As I unfolded it, the paper edge sliced a thin line across my fingertip. A small sting. A tiny bead of blood. A quiet noir truth pain, delivered by something simple. I pressed my thumb to the cut as I unfolded the paper fully. Camille cleared her throat. My camera caught Daniel on the porch at 9:02 p.m. He wasn't alone. The words sliced deeper than the paper had. My eyes found the printed still frame. The porch camera wasn't high quality, but good enough. I recognized the angle, the edge of our building's siding, the faint glow of the street lamp. And I recognized Daniel's posture, tense, angled, leaning slightly toward someone standing just outside the frame. Only the corner of the other person was visible. A sleeve, a shoulder, a glint of something metallic near their wrist. Feminine. My breath steadied not because I wasn't shaken, but because the truth brings a kind of awful calm, a crystallization of possibility. The printed note under the still frame read, "Witness note, Camille Ortiz, camera ref, West Porch, 2102. Subject Daniel, accompanied by unidentified female. Duration 45 seconds. Movement suggests conversation. Subject appears unsettled." I inhaled slowly. This was evidence number 5. And unlike the receipt or the message discrepancy, this one involved a witness, a camera, an outside observer, something public enough to expand the frame beyond our walls. "Do you know who she is?" Camille asked softly. I stared at the sliver of the woman's sleeve. Dark fabric, smooth, almost glossy, the kind of blazer material worn in corporate offices. A memory flickered the metallic shadow that distorted Daniel's face in the parking lot. The sharp line of a woman's silhouette I'd glimpsed only briefly from a distance weeks ago. The faint scent on his coat sleeve the night I found it damp. "I think I do," I said. Camille stepped back, worry creasing her brow. "I'm really sorry, Elise. I didn't want to be in the middle of anything. You're not in the middle." I folded the paper carefully. "You're just showing me something I needed to see." She nodded, relief and sorrow blending in her eyes. "If you need anything, I'm around." When she left, I stood alone in the quiet, holding the still frame. The cut on my finger pulsed lightly, tiny but insistent. Pain is rarely proportional to meaning. I sat at the table, laid out the evidence. Receipt number 8421K, screenshot edges, ZL 47 2018, MSG ID 229B, audio clip 03A with 11-second silence. And now, Camille's witness note 2102. A timeline was forming. A sequence that didn't require imagination, just honesty. Daniel hadn't simply lied. He had built a structure of lies, a scaffold of shifting stories. I stared at the cut on my finger, watching the small bead of blood form again, as the paper's edge replayed itself in my memory. Pain is data. Data is evidence. Evidence is truth. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked to the window. Outside, the winter light broke across the street in sporadic flickers, catching on passing cars, creating thin, splintered reflections in patches across the asphalt. Everything around me was made of pieces, and pieces always assemble into a whole. I opened the door, stepping into the cold. The cut on my finger stung when the wind hit it, a reminder I couldn't ignore. I needed to speak to someone who had authority, someone who understood the structure of lies professionally. And there was only one name that fit that requirement: Jonas Pierce, HR coordinator. He had always been neutral and distant in temperament, a man who treated information with the sterile caution of someone who had seen too many workplace disasters unfold. But neutrality also meant truth. And I needed truth. Before heading toward my car, I looked once more at Camille's envelope. 2102. Daniel on the porch speaking to a woman he should never have been speaking to outside office hours. A woman whose sleeve matched the silhouette I'd seen before. A woman whose name sat uncomfortably in my memory. Mara. I closed my hand around the paper, the cut stinging again, as the edge pressed into my skin. Pain is memory, and memory is clarity. I walked down the driveway, the winter air slicing across my face like the paper edge had sliced my finger. The truth wasn't fully revealed yet. But it was coming. Sharp. Inevitable. Impossible to unsee. And I would meet it head on. By the time I reached the office complex where Jonas worked, the sky had opened up into a full winter rain. Not a storm, not a gentle drizzle, but a steady, relentless fall that coated the world in a cold, shimmering film. The pavement glistened under street lamps, stretching reflections into long, smeared lines that made the city look like a photograph smudged by an unsteady hand. I stepped out of my car, clutching an umbrella that immediately tried to invert itself against the wind. My coat absorbed the rain faster than I expected, the cold seeping through the fabric until it felt like I was wearing a layer of ice. I moved quickly toward the entrance. Inside the lobby was warm humming with quiet HVAC noise, the kind of sterile comfort corporate spaces cultivate when they want people to forget the world outside. The overhead lights cast thin reflections onto the marble floor. They wavered slightly as rainwater dripped from my coat. Jonas spotted me before I reached the front desk. "Elise?" he said, surprise softening into concern. "You okay?" "I need 10 minutes," I said, breath steadier than I felt, maybe less. He led me into a small conference room, the kind used for quick interviews and delicate conversations. Neutral gray walls, frosted glass panel, a dim corner lamp casting a faint golden pool of light. As soon as the door closed, the rain outside seemed to intensify, drumming quietly against the building like a warning. "What's going on?" Jonas asked gently. I removed my coat. The sleeve slapped against the edge of the table, scattering droplets across the surface. The fabric was heavy, saturated. A rain-wet coat sleeve, a small but sharp symbol, the same coat Daniel had claimed he hadn't worn outside the day it reeked faintly of someone else's perfume. The dampness brought that memory back with precision. "I need information," I said, "about badge swipes, for Daniel." His expression shifted, still professional, but with a trace of tension. "Elise, you know I can't I don't need details about other employees." I cut in. "Only about my husband. Only what concerns me." He studied me for a long moment. "This sounds personal." "It is." My voice didn't tremble. It didn't need to. Jonas exhaled and sat tapping his fingers lightly against the table. "Tell me exactly what you're asking." I placed the printed still frame from Camille on the table, but I didn't slide it toward him. I let him see only the corner Daniel's blurred silhouette. "The timestamp." "Did Daniel come back to the office last night?" I asked. Jonas frowned. "Last night? Yes." I held his eyes steady and unyielding. "I'd have to check the logs," he said carefully. "Then check them." He hesitated before standing and walking to the computer in the corner of the room. The monitor glowed to life, casting faint blue light across his glasses. He typed quickly, navigating through a series of administrative screens. The rain outside intensified again, the sound vibrating faintly through the window pane. I clasped my hands together to keep myself still. My heartbeat was steady, measured like the way I conducted audits during deadlines, sharp, controlled, unflinching. After a moment, Jonas leaned closer to the screen. "That's strange," he murmured. My pulse tightened. "What is?" He clicked again, brow furrowing deeper. "There's an entry here, but it's inconsistent. Show me." He turned slightly, though he kept the monitor angled ethically away from full view policy embedded deep in his posture. "Daniel's badge was logged at entry 14B yesterday," he said slowly. "But the timestamp doesn't match his usual pattern." My breath sharpened. Entry 14B. Badge swipe mismatch. Evidence number 6. Meaning I pressed. Jonas rubbed his jaw. It shows a swipe, then almost immediately a follow-up flag indicating a second verification attempt. But the second one was denied. I froze. Denied. He nodded. And the denial time matches, well, he sighed, matches a time he shouldn't have been anywhere near the building. The air shifted around me, cold threading through the room even as the heater hummed. What time, I asked. 4:08 p.m., he said reluctantly. The same time that appeared on the receipt from Rosewood Cafe. The same time Daniel had claimed to be in a meeting. A time that sat like a quiet fracture in the middle of his entire story. Something inside me slid into place, not satisfaction, not heartbreak, something colder. The sensation of a puzzle piece clicking where it always belonged. He wasn't here, I said. Jonas's silence confirmed it, and he tried to pretend he was. He added quietly, Entry 14B shouldn't have two records. That only happens when someone uses a badge at a time the security system isn't expecting. A falsified presence, a manufactured alibi, a desperate attempt to cover a timeline crack. Jonas stood clearly uncomfortable. Elise, I don't know what's happening, but I don't like the pattern. Pattern. The word felt like an old friend. Dangerous, reliable, clearer than people ever are. I leaned back in the chair, letting the truth settle. My coat sleeve dripped onto the floor, forming a small dark circle that spread slowly. What do I do with this? I asked quietly. Jonas looked at me with something like sympathy. That depends on what you think he's lying about. I didn't answer, because I didn't know yet. Not fully. But the pieces were layering. 20, 18 message timestamp. 14, 32 message preview. 16, 07 cafe receipt. 21:02 porch camera still. 11-second audio cut. Entry, 14B badge mismatch. It wasn't one lie. It was a sequence, a constructed narrative falling apart under its own imbalance. I shouldn't give you this, Jonas said softly, sliding a single printed log toward me. But you deserve to understand the truth before you decide what comes next. The paper was crisp, freshly printed. He didn't look at it again. I didn't touch it immediately. Sometimes truth burns if you pick it up too quickly. When I finally reached for it, the light from the conference lamp created a thin tremble along the edges, another reflection fragmenting in the quiet. I read the entry. There it was. 14B badge. In 14B badge. Verification. Denied time. 16:08. Location. North entrance. 3 minutes after the cafe receipt. 5 minutes before his call, saying he was still stuck at the office. Cold lined my ribs. I folded the page carefully. Thank you, I said. Jonas nodded. If you need anything else, I will, I replied. I slid into my damp coat, and walked out into the lobby. The rain outside had grown harsher, streaking the glass in long, trembling lines that blurred the world beyond. As I stepped back into the downpour, the cold soaked into my sleeves again. My hands clenched around the evidence. The truth pulsed through my veins with the slow, certain rhythm of something long overdue. The storm wasn't letting up. Neither was I. By Monday evening, the rain had slowed into a thin, persistent drizzle, small drops tapping on the windows, like a patient reminder that nothing had been resolved, only revealed. The apartment was warm, but the warmth felt misplaced, like a coat left draped over a chair long after the person had gone. Daniel wasn't home yet. He'd sent a short message. Running late again. Don't wait up. The words were harmless if you read them without context, but context is everything. And context had become a noose tightening around every lie he'd told. I stood in the kitchen, palms pressed against the cool counter, watching the faint tremble of the glass reflections along the backsplash. They split as I moved, bending in ways that matched the quiet distortion inside my chest. The truth was closing and gathering shape. When the clock hit 6:30, I finally stepped outside. The air was damp, carrying that heavy metallic scent left behind after hours of rain. The parking lot glistened in the low streetlights, casting distorted reflections across puddles that made the world look like it was layered in pieces. I walked toward Daniel's car, not to invade, not to stalk, but because something in my mind wouldn't stop nudging me forward. I approached the driver's side door, scanning the ground the way I would scan the edges of a spreadsheet, looking for anomalies. Something caught my eye. A small pile of cigarette ash sat near the front tire. I crouched, touching the tip of one ash flake lightly. It crumbled instantly, soft and gray. Daniel didn't smoke. He hated the smell. He once crossed the street to avoid walking behind a man with a lit cigarette. So what was this doing here? More importantly, who had been standing close enough to his car to let the ash fall? The ash told a story. Someone had leaned there. Someone comfortable enough to linger. Someone close. I tightened my jaw and stood slowly. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, Jonas's name on the screen. A weight formed in my chest. I answered. "Yes, Elise," he said, the seriousness in his voice coding every syllable. "You asked me to notify you if anything else unusual showed up in the logs." My breath froze. What happened? "There was a device traced today," he said. "Not his badge. His phone." My heartbeat sharpened. When 18:07. 6:07 p.m. Just minutes ago. And the location, I asked quietly. A pause. A shift in his breathing. "That's the thing Jonas said. It pinged out of zone." Out of zone. A phrase that meant one thing in his company's system. He was somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. Somewhere not associated with his routine routes. Somewhere he had no reason to be. Where exactly, I asked. "I can't give you the address," Jonas replied. "But I can tell you the general region. It's nowhere near the office. And it's not on the route between here and your home." My grip tightened on the phone. "Thank you for telling me. Elise," he added softly, "before I hung up, whatever you think is happening. You deserve real answers." "I know." I ended the call and stared at the dark shape of Daniel's car. The drizzle made tiny dots across the windshield, each one catching a glimmer of streetlight like tiny fractures. The cigarette ash near the tire looked even more out of place now, like punctuation on a sentence I hadn't finished reading. 6:07 p.m. Out of zone. His device never strayed unless he strayed. I walked slowly around the car, scanning the asphalt, the painted lines, the shadows. My shoes brushed against something small, another speck of ash. It moved lightly, scattering. The ash trail led toward the walkway, faint but present. Someone had been here. Recently. Close enough to lean against the car, flick ash, and speak privately. I followed the faint line until it vanished near the edge of the lot, erased by the rain. But the truth didn't wash away with it. The truth had already embedded itself. My phone vibrated again. A message from Daniel. 10 more minutes. Traffic. Nothing else. Traffic. An excuse so thin it barely held its own weight. I typed nothing. I simply locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I wasn't going to wait inside anymore. Waiting inside meant giving him the benefit of doubt, trusting in a story built on diminishing timelines and manufactured alibis. I walked back towards the building, but instead of going upstairs, I waited under the covered entryway. The overhang kept the drizzle off me, but the air remained cold, sharp, filled with that faint metallic scent that always follows seasonal rain. 15 minutes later, Daniel's car pulled into the lot. He didn't see me immediately. His headlights washed across the pavement, lighting the place where the ash had drifted before the rain diluted it. He parked slightly crooked, another small sign, another fracture. He stepped out, pulling his jacket tighter around him. I watched him from the shadows under the entryway. He looked tired. but tiredness doesn't erase truth. When he finally noticed me, he flinched, not dramatically, but visibly. "Elise?" he asked, surprised. "What are you doing out here?" I stepped forward, letting the overhead light cast part of my face into view. "Waiting." "For what?" "For you." He swallowed. His posture shifted shoulders, tightening weight, sliding awkwardly to one side. "You could have waited inside." I didn't answer that. I looked at him with a clarity I hadn't allowed myself before. "Where were you?" I asked. "Traffic," he repeated. "There's no traffic on Westmore at this hour." He blinked. "A tiny fracture." "I took a different route." "Which one?" He hesitated just long enough to confirm the lie. "Elise," he said softly, "I'm doing my best here. Work has been stressful. I needed some time to decompress. I drove around a bit, that's all." He lied, as if the truth were a blanket he was trying to tuck beneath his feet, hidden, unnecessary, fragile. "Your device pinged out of zone," I said. He froze. Not visibly, but I saw his breath skip, barely perceptible. "How would you know that?" he asked, voice lowering. It wasn't an accusation. It was fear. Because someone who actually tells the truth told me I said. His eyes darkened shadow, passing through them, like a cloud moving across a trembling reflection. He stepped closer. "Elise, I don't know what you think you're doing, but I saw the ash by your car." I cut in. "Cigarette ash." He blinked. "So you don't smoke?" His jaw tightened. "That doesn't mean anything. It does when you combine it with everything else." The rain softened, thinning into a mist. Reflections formed small glimmers across the pavement like tiny fractured mirrors scattered beneath our feet. "Elise," he said slowly. "I'm not—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't tell me you're not lying. Don't insult both of us." His shoulders dropped. He looked away toward the lot, toward the empty spaces between cars. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. I stepped into the full light now. No more shadows, no more concealment. "Because I'm done waiting for you to tell me a truth you keep editing." He exhaled, long and shaky. "We should go inside." "We're not going inside," I said. "Not tonight." His breath caught. Because he knew. He knew the next step wasn't silence. It wasn't tolerance. It wasn't another night of avoiding the truth. It was confrontation. "Tomorrow," I said softly, "you and I are going to your office, and we're going to speak with Jonas." His eyes widened. "Elise, no." "Yes. Please." "Tomorrow," I repeated, "the truth stops hiding." He closed his eyes briefly. The drizzle tapped on the hood of his car like fingertips marking time. When he opened them again, fear was no longer concealed. It was present, visible, real. I turned and walked back toward the building, leaving him standing in the rain-softened light, surrounded by ash-shaken lies and the weight of the truth closing in. The next morning felt unnaturally bright for a winter day. The sun wasn't shining so much as forcing its way through the clouds, casting pale, harsh light on everything it touched. It was the kind of morning that made even ordinary details feel overexposed, as if the world had nothing left to hide. Daniel barely spoke as we got ready. He moved through the apartment like he was afraid of making sound, afraid that sound itself might trigger a collapse. When he finally picked up his keys, his hands were unsteady, not dramatically, so just enough that I noticed. "We'll take separate cars," I said. He nodded, and the nod felt like a surrender he didn't want to acknowledge. The drive to his office passed in a frame of cold silence and stubborn breaths. The clouds tightened overhead, darkening around the edges, as if the sky itself sensed the fracture we were walking into. When I arrived, I parked in the visitor section and watched Daniel pull into his usual spot far across the lot. He didn't wait for me. He walked briskly toward the entrance, shoulders high, tension radiating off him in sharp, invisible shards. Inside the lobby, the air was warm, an artificially scented, fabricated normalcy. But the moment we crossed the threshold into the hallway toward the conference wing, the temperature seemed to drop. My breath moved slower in my chest. Each step sounded too loud in the sterile corridor. Jonas was waiting for us outside a small conference room. His expression was unreadable, not sympathetic, not cold, just neutral. The neutrality of someone tasked with balancing facts against emotion. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Daniel managed a stiff nod. "Is this necessary?" Jonas didn't answer that question. Instead, he opened the door and motioned us inside. The room was dimmer than I expected. Only one lamp was on the tall standing lamp in the corner, its bulb aging, its shade worn. The dim lamp cast a tired gold-tinted halo that stretched thin shadows across the table. Noir lighting at its most unforgiving. Daniel looked at it, then at Jonas. "Can we turn on the overheads?" "No," Jonas said gently but firmly. "They're flickering. Maintenance is working on it." So we sat in half-shadow. The perfect setting, I thought, for truths that had been hiding in half-light. Jonas began without theatrics. "You asked me to recheck the badge logs," he said, looking at Daniel. "And I did." Daniel leaned forward, fingers interlaced too tightly. "Right." Jonas nodded. "And Elise asked me to look deeper into the inconsistencies surrounding yesterday evening. So I pulled what we call a composite review. It collects multiple system logs into a single unified record." Daniel's throat bobbed. "Composite, yes," Jonas said. "Your badge logs, device location message, archive timestamps, and building access points." My breath caught. This was evidence number 8, the final truth composite. Jonas placed a single document on the table. A printed sheet, black and white, crisp edges sharp. The top line read, "Merged log ref. CX9. Message archive. Refern 302. Daniel stared at it but didn't touch. Jonas folded his hands. "Before we go through this, is there anything you want to tell Elise?" Daniel let out a shaky exhale. "Jonas, please don't do this like some sort of tribunal. We can talk privately." "No." The word left my mouth before I realized I'd spoken it. No more private conversations, no more edited versions. Daniel's eyes flicked toward me, wounded. "I'm not editing anything." "Then explain," I said. "Explain the ash. Explain the badge mismatch. Explain the messages. Explain the woman at 2102. His face crumpled for a moment, then smoothed into something unconvincing. Jonas cleared his throat. "Let me break down the composite." He tapped the first entry with a pen. 1. Device trace. 1807. Location out of zone. A location tied to a residential complex 11 miles from here, Jonas said quietly. Not related to any company site. Daniel looked like he'd been struck. I told you I took a drive that coincidentally placed you near the same district where your coworker Mara lives," I asked. His eyes widened. "Elise, that's not—" "I wasn't—" Jonas continued, tapping the next line. 2. Archive Refern 302A message chain retrieved from system backup. Your message history shows deletion attempts, he said. Messages removed manually between 1410 and 1440. Daniel's breath stuttered. Mine didn't. And one message Jonas added carefully was flagged before deletion. He slid the document slightly toward us. "I miss you. Can we talk after she leaves?" Sender ID Mara Avery. My chest tightened, not with shock, but with the terrible quiet confirmation of everything the pieces had hinted at. Daniel buried his face in his hands. "It's not what you think." "You keep saying that," I said softly. "Why don't you tell me what it is?" He didn't answer. Jonas continued before Daniel could gather breath. 3. Merged Access Log Ref. CX9. This compiles movements between building entrances and communications, he said. It shows overlap. He pointed. 1432. Phone notification from Mara. 1435. Badge swipe attempt. 1607. Purchase at Rosewood Cafe, 1608. Badge verification denied. 2018. Message from Mara received 2102. Daniel seen on porch with unidentified female. Daniel's voice broke. You think I'm not? This isn't. What were you doing at 2102? I asked. He stared at the table. Talking. To who? He didn't answer. Jonas looked between us and stepped back, giving space that felt more like pressure. Daniel finally lifted his head, eyes red, voice thin. She needed to talk. She came by. Why? She thought I was going to tell you everything, he whispered. Because she told me she was going to tell HR first. The room tilted slightly. Tell HR. What? My voice was calm. Too calm. Daniel swallowed hard. That she misunderstood something, and she thought I felt the same, and I didn't. And I panicked because it got out of control. Out of control how? He looked at me, then truly looked. She kissed me, he said, voice cracking. I didn't kiss her back. But I didn't pull away fast enough, and she thought it meant something. And then she thought I was choosing you instead of her, and she threatened to file something with HR. And I didn't want you to think, Elise, I didn't want you to believe. So you lied. My voice stayed steady, but something inside me split. I was trying to end things cleanly, he whispered. I was trying to. Cleanly? I laughed and the sound echoed too sharp. You deleted messages. She came to our porch at 9 p.m. You created entire timelines to cover your tracks. He flinched. I'm sorry. Jonas stepped aside entirely now, the dim lamp throwing long shadows across the table. Daniel reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. Elise, please, he said, tears forming. It was never supposed to be like this. I just needed someone to talk to. And she took it too far. I tried to pull back. I just didn't know how to tell you without losing you. You lost me when you chose the lie over the truth, I said. Silence fell thick and final. The dim lamp flickered once, as if struggling under the weight of what had been said. Daniel closed his eyes, shaking. I'm sorry, he whispered again. I'm so sorry. But apologies can't undo truth. The composite lay between us, every timestamp, every discrepancy, every missing second stitched into an unbreakable narrative. He had chosen half-light over honesty, and half-light had exposed everything. I stood slowly. Daniel's voice cracked. Elise, don't leave. I'm not leaving, I said. His eyes searched mine with sudden fragile hope. But you are. His hope shattered. The truth wasn't a blade. It was a mirror, and he had finally seen himself in it. I left Daniel in the conference room with his hands pressed to his face, the dim lamp behind him flickering like it had fought too hard to stay lit. Jonas didn't say anything when I walked past him, only stepped slightly aside and lowered his eyes, as if the weight of the truth had spread into the floor beneath us. The hallway felt colder than it had when I arrived, colder than the weather outside. Truth has a way of temperature shifting the world. It changes the air without warning. I didn't rush home. I drove slowly, letting the hum of the engine fill my chest with a numb sort of steadiness. Rain drifted in thin streaks along the windshield, each drop catching the dull light of street lamps and turning into glistening threads that broke, reformed, and broke again. The world outside looked fractured. Maybe it always had been. I had just refused to see the fracture lines. When I reached the apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. The dim gray from the overcast sky seeped in through the blinds and settled along the walls. Everything appeared slightly out of focus, like a memory trying to remember itself. I walked toward the bedroom and noticed a faint glint on the carpet near the dresser. Something small, something sharp. At first I thought it was nothing, maybe a piece of tinsel from last winter, a stray earring backing a bit of broken plastic. But when I knelt and picked it up, the truth showed itself in my palm. A mirror shard, jagged on one side, smooth on the other, reflective enough to return a sliver of my face, my eye, my cheekbone, a thin, trembling line of light that split the features into two unequal halves. I turned it gently between my fingers, catching different angles of myself in the tiny surface. When had the mirror broken? Not recently. The edges weren't fresh. There was no powder of glass around it. It must have cracked weeks ago, maybe months, and I had never noticed that a piece had fallen. The thought chilled me more than the shard's cold surface. How many things had cracked without me seeing? How many truths had splintered quietly while I was busy trusting the reflection instead of the reality behind it? I placed the shard on the dresser. It caught the faint light and threw it against the wall, a small trembling line, familiar in shape, reminiscent of all the reflections that had warned me long before I understood what they meant. The final reflection doesn't lie, even when the person does. That thought rose through me, not yet the motif resolve, but the beginning of it, the soft edge of clarity sharpening into something decisive. I sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. The apartment felt different. Too quiet, but not the quiet of comfort. It was the quiet of aftermath. The quiet left behind when truth has already detonated and the dust hasn't settled yet. My eyes traveled across the room, landing on the open closet door. Inside, Daniel's shirts hung in neat rows, color-coded out of habit. I stared at them for a long moment, feeling nothing, not anger, not grief, just a steady, cold lucidity, the kind that comes only after you've stopped bargaining with your own denial. A soft buzz trembled in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. A message from Daniel. "Please come back to the office. We need to talk without Jonas." I stared at the words. They felt hollow, desperate, rehearsed. The same tone he used when shaping lies into soft, palatable forms. I put the phone down without responding. Another message arrived almost immediately. "I didn't want to hurt you." But he had. Not with the kiss he didn't stop quickly enough, not with the messages he deleted, not with the porch meeting at 2102, not even with the badge mismatch. He hurt me by choosing the half-truth over the whole one, by choosing to protect the lie instead of the person he claimed to love. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the drizzle had stopped. The world looked washed, blurred, cleansed in a way that didn't match the heaviness sitting in my chest. A few cars moved slowly down the street. A woman jogged past, her ponytail swinging in a rhythmic motion. Life continued. It always does. Behind me, the mirror shard on the dresser caught a thread of winter light. It glowed, faintly trembling with the movement of air from the heating vent. I turned toward it again. I picked it up. The surface was too small to show a full reflection, but it was enough to reveal the truth. My eyes were steady, not broken. My expression was calm, not shattered. The fracture wasn't mine. It never had been. Daniel had texted again. "Elise, please, don't walk away from me." But I already had. Not physically, not completely, but emotionally. I had stepped beyond the threshold of who I was before part one. The woman with steady routines and quiet trust. The woman who valued stillness over confrontation. The woman who believed that reflection always meant clarity. She was gone. And in her place was someone new, someone sharpened by evidence, by silence, by trembling reflections that refused to stay still. Someone shaped by truth, whether she wanted it or not. I walked into the hallway and noticed something else on the floor, a second shard smaller, almost invisible. I picked it up and placed it on the dresser next to the first. Two broken pieces, two halves of a whole that no longer fit together. Daniel and me. A car pulled into the lot. I recognized the headlights even before the engine stopped. Daniel was home. The footsteps upstairs told me he was walking toward our door, moving slowly, fearfully. I didn't move. I didn't prepare. I simply waited in the dim light of our bedroom, watching my reflection tremble in the glass shard on the dresser. The door opened. "Elise." His voice cracked. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence sit between us heavy and full. He stepped inside, closed the door, and came toward me with a face full of remorse and something else I couldn't name. Elise, he whispered. I didn't choose her. I chose you. I always chose you. I looked at him, letting the quiet shape the space between us. But you lied, I said. He broke, then visibly, shoulders collapsing, breath faltering. I didn't know how to tell the truth without losing everything. You lost everything because you didn't tell the truth. Tears spilled silently down his face. He reached out, then let his hand fall when he saw that I didn't move. Elise, please. I lifted the mirror shard. He flinched, not from fear but from recognition. This, I said softly, is what our marriage became. A reflection broken into pieces you didn't want me to see. He lowered his head. And you kept the biggest piece hidden, I added, until it cut both of us. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time in a long time, I felt clarity, not harsh, not punishing, just clear. The beginning of resolution. Not the end, not yet, but the beginning. I placed the shard down gently, and the truth settled between us with the weight of something final. The morning light slides into the apartment like it already knows what happened, soft but uninvited, touching everything with a clarity I can't avoid anymore. I stand in the hallway for a moment, steadying my breath, listening to the faint hum of the heater and the creak of the floorboards settling beneath the weight of a truth that no longer hides. Daniel is sitting at the kitchen table. His hands fold and unfold like he's trying to decide whether to reach for something or let it go. The quiet between us feels stretched thin, a long sheet of glass that hasn't shattered yet, but carries every crack. I walk past him without speaking. My footsteps sound different this morning, lighter, sharper, unburdened. Maybe that's what truth does. It breaks you, then clears you. He stands when he sees me moving toward the living room. Elise, he says softly, please, just tell me what you're thinking. I don't answer right away. The living room window is cracked open, and a small winter gust slips through it. The open window lets in air that tastes like cold metal and distant morning traffic. The curtains shift, brushing my arm like a reminder that the world outside still moves, even when ours has stalled. I step closer to the window, resting my hand on the sill. I'm thinking, I say quietly, that we've been living inside a house made of reflections, and reflections can't hold weight. He swallows hard. I told you everything yesterday. All of it. No more lies. But they already did their damage. He moves closer cautiously as if approaching a fragile object. We can fix this. We can try. I can try. Trying isn't the same as telling the truth. When it mattered, I say. Trying is what people do after the truth arrives too late. He stops a few feet away from me. His breathing shakes. I didn't want to lose you. You lost me the moment you protected the lie over the truth. He closes his eyes, a pained, slow exhale leaving his chest. I don't know how to come back from this. I don't either, I admit. Outside, a car door slams. A dog barks. A bus sighs to a stop at the corner. Normal sounds. Sounds belonging to people who didn't wake to the quiet collapse of a marriage. Daniel wipes his eyes with the back of his hand. If you walk away, I won't blame you. But I hope you don't. I hope we can rebuild. I watch the curtains sway gently from the breeze, the fabric bending the light into soft lines across the floor. The light doesn't tremble like it used to. It stands still, solid. For weeks, I chased reflections on counters in glass and timestamps, in small glimmers of truth, slipping under doors. And now the last one stands in front of me. Daniel, I say, turning toward him, do you understand what this did to me? He nods slowly. Yes. You took the part of me that trusted without looking twice, and you cracked it. You broke something that doesn't grow back the same way. I know. His voice is barely audible. And you didn't break it with the kiss, I continue. You didn't break it with the messages, or the woman on the porch, or the ash near your car. He's crying now. Then what did I break? The moment I asked for the truth, and you gave me fear instead. His face collapses into his hands, shoulders trembling, breath uneven. I watch him, but I don't move toward him. My hands stay at my sides, still, steady. After a long moment, he looks up. Do you want me to leave? No, I say. Not today. Surprise flickers in his eyes. Then, what happens next? We stop pretending nothing happened, I answer. We stop putting shadows between us. We stop living inside edited versions of the truth. He wipes his face again, nodding. I can do that. You'll have to, I say. And I will too. But honesty doesn't fix everything. It only removes the fog. What we do with the clear air, that's the hard part. He steps 1 inch closer. Can I ask something? Yes. Do you still love me? The question hits the air like a sharp breath. Not painful, just undeniable. I do, I say. But love isn't the question. The question is whether I can trust you again. He flinches. Can you? I don't know. Not yet. He nods, accepting it with a quiet discipline I haven't seen from him in a long time. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes. You don't fix trust by waiting, I say. You fix it by showing up every day without hiding behind shadows. You fix it by telling the whole truth the first time. He nods again, slower. I will. I look back at the open window. The cold wind shifts the curtain again, and the light lands across the floor in a clean, steady line. That's when the motif resolves itself inside me, not spoken, not forced, but arriving naturally like a hard-earned breath. The reflection no longer trembles, because I finally do. Not with fear, not with doubt, with clarity. For the first time, the trembling isn't coming from the light, it's coming from me. From letting myself stand inside the truth instead of beside it. Daniel steps closer. Elise, can we take it one day at a time? We can, I say, but every day starts with honesty. I can give you that, he whispers. And if you don't, I say, I'll walk away next time without hesitation. He nods. I understand. The apartment grows quiet again, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel threatening anymore. The kind that carries possibility, even if it still carries pain. I close the window halfway, letting in just enough air to keep the room cool. Fresh. New. Daniel stands behind me, not touching, not assuming, just waiting. And for the first time in weeks, the waiting doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like a choice. I look at him, not the man he pretended to be, but the man who finally faced himself in the dim light of a flickering lamp and told the truth at last. We'll see, I say softly. That's all I can promise right now. He exhales, shaky, hopeful. I turn away from the open window and walk toward the kitchen, the light steady at my back, the air shifting around me like a reminder that everything has changed. The world outside keeps moving, and so do I.